Okay, so here I go with this. This is my first time doing this particular version of streaming, I guess you'd say, where it's just my face and my voice here basically going out. But and I'm sure my audio levels are going to vary a bit here because I don't generally use condenser mic like this. And I had some obstacles that I hopefully won't bore you too much with, but I think I've sorted out the audio thing. And this was basically just going to be kind of a whatever you want to call it, a stream about writing, I guess, and in particular, like lyric writing. Someone had asked me about this, and I actually did a video previously that's on my YouTube channel where I talked about lyric writing specifically, and but someone had asked me to do like kind of a deeper dive into it, and I thought, okay, well, I could try to do that for what it's worth. And one thing that that comes to there's a couple things really, but one thing that comes to me off the top, I think about writing is, you know, I I can't of course speak for everyone, but I can certainly speak for myself, and I think I've seen it a lot in other people who endeavor to write, whether it's writing music or anything, I suppose. But uh, I've seen it in forums and things like that where people are talking about it, and there's it's the idea of like how do I get inspired? How do I get inspired to write? And the funny thing is that you know this is just my take on it, and I've been writing all pretty much all my life now for somewhere around 40 years in one form or another. And one thing that's interesting about that is in a way that I feel like they're almost like kind of answering their own question, I guess, because you know if you want to write and you have the desire to write, the way as I see it, that in itself is the inspiration. You know, I think what maybe where people get get stuck is they get is like the idea of, well, there has to be like some uh, I have to have some kind of like eureka moment or some kind of epiphany before I can write. And I think that's really kind of reverse, at least in my experience, of how it works. Because if you're sitting around waiting for some kind of something like that, a eureka moment, if you will, um, it may come. It probably will at some point, I imagine. But who knows when that will be, right? I mean, it could be a month from now, a year from now, never. You never know. And to me, it's more the desire to create and to know that you want to write something is more about what the inspiration is about than waiting for that eureka moment or that epiphany. And so it's about I, there's this quote that Stephen King said, um, and I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if this is exactly how he put it, but it was the idea that amateurs wait for inspiration, and the rest of us just go to work. And at the risk of sounding, I'm an amateur myself. I've never really made much money at all off my writing, but I do have a lot of experience, years of doing it, and hopefully I've gleaned some wisdom over those years. And it's that central idea, I think, is kind of what I'm talking about, and that I find that those eureka moments or those epiphanies come more in the process of writing than as like something that launches you into writing, right? The launching point for me is just realizing that I think perhaps my deepest inspiration is just simply my desire to create, to write, you know, uh, and that's true of probably I imagine any artistic endeavor that I do, at least, is that uh, just knowing that you want to do it, and you have a strong desire to do it, that to me should be your impetus, your what gets you going, not waiting for that that strong emotion or something, that some force from outside or something to spur you to write. Now, I mean, I imagine that maybe that even works for some people. That there are some people that write a couple books or a couple songs or do a couple paintings in a lifetime, and maybe that's enough for those people. I don't know. Another uh, another thing that I've uh, gleaned over the years, I guess. Actually, in recent years, I read this somewhere, and it's the idea. I think these things kind of go hand in hand in a way. These two, like if you take that Stephen King quote and what I've been talking about here, and this concept, I think they're kind of related, perhaps in a way. But it's the concept of again, I don't know if this is the exact way it was worded, but it's the idea at least of like writing for the trash can, which sounds kind of stupid almost, ridiculous, but I've actually found a lot of value in it, and I think what it has done for me at least is it's the idea of taking all that a lot of pressure off yourself, right? Because I think maybe that's part of the reason that we get stuck as creative people or writers or whatever it is, musicians, is that we put all this pressure on ourselves to reach some high bar of whatever it is that you're obsessed on, perhaps. Some could be anything, could be just anything and everything, I suppose, every aspect of whatever it is you're trying to do. If it's lyric writing, you could think of perhaps some great song and you think, oh, I've got to be somewhere near that in my own writing, right? Or some kind of pressure. And I found that when I took that simple core concept of writing for the trash can, that it's just like all of a sudden it was almost like, at the risk of sounding kind of dramatic, I suppose, like some of the chains have been released, and I was free to just write. I could, okay, well, I'm just going to write then, and I'm just going to, whatever comes out comes out. I mean, and that's true. I think whenever you're writing, you always, well, unless it's something like this. Although I was going to say like this, but this in fact isn't really a live stream. I'm streaming it to YouTube, and then I'm going to upload it later, I guess. For whatever reason, I've done it that way. But unless it's something literally like that live, like this would be if it were live, you always have the option in writing, whether it's recording music or writing lyrics. You always have that option to look at it after you've written it and change it. If you look at it, even if it's all horrible, well, you can just put it in the recycle bin, right? You don't have to keep it. So I mean, that's another thing I think that can help reduce the pressure of that idea of writing, is I don't have to keep this ultimately, or all of it anyway. I can edit out at least parts of it. And so yeah, and here's an interesting thing that I found when the whole writing for the trash can thing, and that was this is really kind of strange, but I found it fascinating. When I first started to do it, it was I actually found that somehow the opposite was true. It was in the process of writing and recording music, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna focus on this principle of writing for the trash can, and just try and give myself a break, and just lighten up and maybe have some rough edges or whatever it may, mean, however it may manifest itself. And the strange thing is that the opposite somehow was true, at least initially. I realized that I was being more meticulous and more, uh, hard on myself, I guess, in a sense of, and it was really strange when I realized, wow, I'm being even more meticulous about this than I normally am. And I'm trying to, the thought was to implement that idea of writing for the trash can, but I found I was spending more time. I was like, spending more time on individual elements of the song, and it was just like, wow, okay, well, that's interesting in and of itself. So by trying to be more relaxed and take a less critical, I suppose, course, the opposite became true, at least initially. Somehow, I'm not even sure if it was an act of will or what, but somehow over time, and I don't think it was too long, maybe like a couple songs in or something of trying this new approach, that changed. It no longer was it, because I think I almost immediately became conscious of it. And I probably thought, okay, I'm not doing this right. This is somehow the opposite effect has occurred, but eventually it did, and not too long in, I think it changed to the point where I was able to be more relaxed. And the thing, what was really blew my mind, I think ultimately was after I'd recorded a few songs, maybe it was even a whole album. I don't know how far I got into it before this really hit me, but I listened back, kind of almost like cringing, thinking, oh boy, this probably isn't going to be too hot. I was really pleasantly surprised with the results. I mean, maybe honestly, if I'm being perfectly honest, that's even underplaying it a little bit, because I was actually almost kind of shocked. Really, I was like, wow, this is what comes out of um, really taking a lot of pressure off myself, and so that was a very positive result, I felt, you know, because I thought that I really had a strong, almost kind of just anxiety about, oh boy, this is going to be horrible. But so yeah, that's another, those, there's a couple principles that I think are kind of related in some way. It's, I don't know, are they really related? I can't remember exactly how I was thinking that they were related, but I think, I guess because like at the core of it, it's the idea of just doing the process. You know, it's like, it seems like that's the biggest stumbling block maybe for people that I've seen in my, my limited, uh, well, somewhat limited experience with this. I mean, it's not like you know, I, I see it within myself at least, in that sometimes it seems like the hardest thing is just literally to get the ball rolling. Now there's and to keep it rolling, I guess. Excuse me while I take a drink here. Um, Another thing I thought about talking about, and honestly, this one's a little tougher for me, maybe. Um, but I guess I'll just apply those concepts I was just talking about. And but no, it's the idea of, like, particularly like in lyric writing, I suppose, of, well, there's a couple things, I guess. One, let me start with this one. One is like the idea of, when you're writing something, do you want it to be specifically about a certain topic or something, right? Almost like if you were writing a novel, would you do an outline, for example? And I think that for some people, probably that's a good way of doing it. I think that there are different strokes for different folks, so to speak, and that I think that I'm one of those people that doesn't really work for. I'm kind of the person who's more just about the spontaneity, and maybe starting with just, a kernel or a seed of an idea, and just trying to expand on it uh, spontaneously, or through just through the process of writing itself. And so I don't know. I mean, I've written a couple novels. I've written a lot of several short stories, and I can see where something in a longer format like that, maybe it would be more conducive to having some kind of outline, maybe just because there's so much more to say there. Maybe it would, in a sense, there would be more of a need for some kind of preset structure. Although that was not the way I worked on when I was writing either a novel or short stories either. I did the same approach as I do with lyric writing, basically, which is just uh, kind of a spontaneous process. Part of my process that I've used in recent years with songwriting is I have a notebook, and I'll just write down a bunch of song titles. I'll do an entire page or sometimes more of just song titles. And even that aspect of it for me is pretty much like throwing spaghetti at a wall. It's just like whatever comes into my mind, kind of a stream of consciousness type thing. I mean, I think that even in that sense, I do a little editing. Like if something comes up and it really just seems like a clinker to me, I won't write it down. I'll say, now let me get something else. But probably 80 to 90% of the things I come up with are just whatever comes into my mind, and I write down song titles, And so then I'll have, like I said, a page or two in a notebook maybe of song titles. And as I go about the process of songwriting with the music and everything, I will just go right down the list of all the song titles. I'll say, okay, what's my next song? Okay, here's what it's called, whatever it is. And I will just start from there. And um, you know, I mean, part of the thing about creative writing, I think, is that maybe people don't often talk about is like, there's the idea of having like a certain topic, I suppose, or even just like adhering to a central idea or theme within a song, where almost like you're almost and maybe literally you're telling a story from point A to point B. You're going from the beginning to the middle to the end of the story, and it's whatever it is, it's very linear in that sense, and that there's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of great songs that have been written that way, but then there's also a kind of song that's I think a little more open ended in that maybe it's just kind of like it's almost abstract, I suppose, in a way. And I've done a lot of that. I enjoy that. And that part is a little perhaps harder to talk about for me, in that it's like it is just kind of stream of consciousness. And I think at the end of the day, what often happens in those sorts of songs is that um, if somebody were to ask you, well, what is that about? What is the song really about? You might not know. I mean, in the sense that you could give some kind of concrete answer. It's more about, maybe just the different ideas that are being expressed. Maybe it's even just the sound of phrases or individual words, how they work together, more than like an intellectual idea. It's more the sound, because, these words are going to be sung as opposed to like, words written in a novel or something. And maybe it's just how the sound of those words, more about the sound of the words or something than even the meaning behind them. Um, I like that personally, because I mean, I think there's, to be honest, there's an aspect to it as a listener, I think, that can be a little frustrating, maybe, because we always, I think, or some of us anyway, look for meaning in things and like songs and stuff. And especially if it's something that somehow has captured your interest, maybe there's a line or something in there that's really kind of like, I don't know, that you relate to. You want it, you almost want it to have meaning, right? You want to, and some specific concrete meaning. And I don't know that that's always the case. I think that to an extent, the way I think of it is that if there's a certain amount of open-endedness to it, then the listener is free to kind of come to their own conclusion about what it means. And in a way, I think that can be almost more intimate and more meaningful, because it's almost like the listener is then playing a part in the process. They are coming to their own conclusion, and I think people do that anyway, often with things, whether it's movie, any kind of art, movies, music, or books or anything. You kind of come to your own conclusion about what it means, and maybe sometimes it's so obvious or something that there's really not much mystery to it. It's like it's whatever it is. The message is so clearly presented that there isn't any mystery, and there's nothing wrong with that either. That's wonderful too. I just I don't know. I mean, I think I've done both types of songs, but I it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard now, 40 years or so along in songwriting, to remember all the nuances of some of the early songs I wrote in terms of the process or whatever. But I mean, some of those songs seem to be, I would say, my earlier stuff, like that I wrote when I was a teenager and stuff. They seem perhaps I don't know, depending on how you want to look at it, clearer or maybe simpler in their meanings. And but the thing I would say is, at least as best as I can remember, even those songs were not something that like I sat down and said, okay, like did some kind of outline or something. as to how this was going to play out. They were just words that I wrote, that came to me, that I wrote, and that, but maybe in the case of some of those earlier songs, the meaning was a little bit clearer or simpler, or more direct in a sense, perhaps. Um, I don't know. Is it better? Is it better to write that way? I don't know. It's hard to say. You know, uh, I don't know that I have an answer for that. I'll say this though. Sometimes I feel like some of those earlier songs are some of the best songs they ever wrote. Honestly, um, I don't know. I don't know if that's true, or if there's like some kind of a nostalgia maybe attached to it, because those were some of the earliest songs they ever wrote, and uh, they've also been, by nature of that, they've also been around the longest, and I've had the longest time to think about them or to listen to them or whatever. But you know, I wouldn't. I don't think there's anything wrong with having like some kind of clear idea ahead of time of what you want to write about. Um, and maybe if you did, it would even, if what you were going for was having some kind of really clear, either story or message, whatever it was that you wanted to convey, perhaps that would be a better way to do it. Is to have kind of think it out beforehand, and maybe even take some notes or something about where you wanted it to go, or what you were trying to say, or what you felt. I just, I one other technique that I have used, and I mentioned, I think I touched on it at least in the other video I made, was like sometimes I feel like the tool that I have that's my strongest tool in terms of lyric writing is just my ability to put words on paper, right? And I mean, just in the simplest sense of writing, really, is just to get things out of my head and then onto paper. That to me is like probably, I would say, my strongest suit, if I, whatever you want to call that. It's my strongest tool in the box. So, um, uh, I've tried this technique that's I've heard it called different things, the 80-20 technique or something like that, where you'll write a whole bunch of stuff. What's a whole bunch of stuff? It means different thing to different people. But say for example, in the sense of writing a song lyrics, which often for me will fit on one piece of paper, or one page in a Word document or something, or maybe a little over that, maybe 1.5 pages. But so if I take my tool, which is the getting words on paper, and just write, instead of just writing a page and a half, maybe I'll write 3 or even 5 pages. And so now I've got that many, let's say 5 pages. I've got 5 pages of words. And now I can go through that and kind of pick and choose which, what I think are the strongest. Now, in honesty, it's not a technique I've used that much. I have used it, and I like it. I think it's kind of inspirational in a sense, because it I don't know, it gives you the sense of having more options or something, and I think it's always the goal to, whatever you're doing in art, to do the best, that you can. You want to have the best, end up with the best product that you can. So, maybe it is beneficial to write that way, because you can see, okay, I have this line, but I have this line that I wrote over here earlier that I like more than this line. So let's get rid of this one, and I'll keep this one, and I think that's probably a more traditional way of writing, that I talked about this in the previous video as well, but you know, a certain amount of editing is always mentioned when in books I've read about writing, or you know it, that's always, I think, um, something that seem to have a lot of value. And again, maybe I'm repeating myself now, because I did mention this in the earlier video, but I over the years, I haven't done a lot of editing, self-editing. If I do, it's usually like, I guess it would be like done in my mind as I'm writing. I'm not one to go back and look at things and say, I like this and that, and I just don't do that. It's almost kind of embarrassing in a way because, you know, honestly, I feel like it's possible that it's an area I could improve in because I kind of just take what I have the sense of just kind of taking what I've been given, if you will. When okay, this is what I have to work with and this is what I'm going to use. It's not to say that I never exclude things or change things. I do, but I would say overall kind of infrequently. And I suppose, from my perspective, especially if you're talking about song lyrics that are generally, I mean, sometimes they don't even fill an entire page, right? Maybe they're 2/3 of a page or something. When you have that little, now I'm sure there's like poets and things who have, labored over one piece of poetry for years or whatever, right? And, God bless them, and nothing against that, but all I'm trying to say is that to me, it seems like when you're working with such a small format, it's usually, I don't know. I just my own personal take on it for where I'm at in my art journey, if you will. Uh, I don't know. I suppose I have a certain amount of confidence or something that I'm able to say what I want to say or say something of value or quality within that small area without doing a whole bunch of editing, I guess. I don't know. That's something honestly that I still think about and I still wonder, well, maybe I should try more to do more editing, I guess. So take that for whatever it's worth, I guess. Let me see if there's anything else I could. I mean, I don't know. When you're talking about meaning within those things, within song lyrics, again, sometimes I think that can be a fairly deep subject, I suppose, in that. Well, again, it depends. It doesn't have to be necessarily. It could be something very simple that you're trying to get across, and but then it also can be something a lot more complex, and maybe you don't even know exactly what it is. I've had the experience of writing some lyrics, and it really didn't dawn on me to some point later on what I was saying, or at least what I think I was saying, right? Because you're not necessarily in the same mindset that you were when you wrote it, so you may have actually uh, possibly, I suppose, even meant something else when you originally wrote it. But like later on, I'll hear it or something, and I'll see a different uh, I'll get a different take on it. I'll say, oh wow, is that what I was talking about or something? I see. That's what I was saying. Um, I've even had it go to where, um, and this is speculative, I think, to some degree, because usually I don't, I don't think I've ever asked anybody about this, but like I've seen people like have certain reactions to something I wrote, and like maybe even been, I don't know, somewhat confused perhaps, or just uncertain about why they had the reaction they had at the time, and then look back on that later on, hindsight and everything, and thought, oh, I see now, it makes sense to me now, because I don't know, those things aren't necessarily always obvious, I guess, right away. But I do think that that's something you can control to a certain extent. Again, if if you are taking the approach of leaving things more open and stream of consciousness or whatever, a little more abstract, perhaps. I would imagine you probably run into more of that just by the nature of what you're doing. You're not. It doesn't necessarily have some kind of solid uh, sense of meaning to it. It's a little more ambiguous, I suppose. So if you are, just want to say something very specific and clear, you can do that, I guess. And okay, so I don't know. Do I really have anything else more to say about this right now? Let me think. Don't want to take too long here thinking about it, but Well, I mean, and even in my approach to this, what I'm doing right here, this stream, this recording, I thought about possibly trying to, script it, I guess, basically, do some kind of outline or script. And I thought, yeah, that's not how I do things, for better or worse, And I've seen both aspects to it, I think, in terms of like, these things. Like I've done a couple other kind of, whatever you want to call them, tutorial type videos on my YouTube channel for songwriting and stuff. And I took a pretty open-ended approach to this. I did think about it, and I even kind of honestly kind of rehearsed it a little bit, my ideas for it, which I suppose is kind of, prepare some level of preparation or structure in that sense. But yeah, basically I just decided I would just wing it, and I'm not working off of any kind of script or anything. I do have my teleprompter set up over here, but you can't see it. So I don't know. Hopefully there was something helpful in there. If I think of more things that I could say about it, maybe I'll do another video. But let me see. I mean, I don't know. One other thing I can think of that's may or may not be helpful is, sometimes when I'm actually in the process, after I've written lyrics and I'm in the process of actually singing them or recording them, sometimes it's fun, for instance, just to start with a chorus. Instead of just like going linearly from the beginning of the song to the end of the song. I do that too, but sometimes it's fun just to start with the chorus, because choruses are often the most emotive or something, kind of a crescendo to a song. So sometimes it's fun to start with the chorus instead of starting at the beginning of the first verse when you're recording, and just record that chorus, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a lift and kind of maybe I don't know, it's a way in to the song, maybe, for lack of a better way of putting it. I've done it many times the other way too, just sang it, linearly from the beginning to the end. But especially with, what I think of as today's technology. You have to remember, I started out with recording to tape and stuff like that. But, the way you can work with the DAWs today, the digital audio workstations and stuff, you can record a chorus, and if you have multiple choruses in a song that are the same, once you get one version of that chorus down, you can even just copy and paste it over to the other choruses, which some people would probably say that's cheating or something. Well, I suppose, but anyway, that was one of the just a small piece of my process that I often use, is that. And in terms of the acts, that's more about, I suppose, performing than necessarily the writing. But and let me see. I guess I'm gonna leave it there. I've got about 30 minutes here on this. But again, hopefully there was something helpful here. And I don't know, if I feel like I've got something else to say about it, I will maybe do another one. Excuse me. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.